Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Maryland Almanac in 2025. Last year, homelessness in the United States went up by 19%, driven in no small part by skyrocketing housing costs. So I thought I would try and answer the question, what is the history of housing in Maryland, and how did it get so expensive? In this video, I'm going to follow State Highway 450 all the way from historic Annapolis to DC and look at how housing trends have changed as people have built out from the state capital. So let's start at Main Street in historic Annapolis. This is one of the oldest neighborhoods in the state, with buildings ranging from the 1760s to the 1850s. And while 450 has become very touristy in the last few decades, the layout of the neighborhood still provides some insight into the life of early Americans. For starters, there were no cars back then, so everything had to be really close together. Most of the buildings are townhouses and storefronts, and the streets are really small and tightly knit. Remember, if you're buying something, like groceries, you need to carry it all the way back home with you, so you can't live too far away from the city center. There's also an odd amount of income diversity here. Annapolis was always a well-to-do area, but you don't typically see mansions tucked away between row homes nowadays. Traveling just a bit west to the Annapolis Arts District, we see some newer buildings, but most of them are still pre-car. The houses in the suburbs here are built around the 1920s and 30s. They're mostly single-family, but still within walking distance to the city. They feel a lot like a natural extension of the houses in the historic district, just with larger lots. The homes here are also all different. Most of them must have been custom made, which gives the neighborhood quite a unique look. Past these are where we start to get into the suburbs proper, and this is where the seeds of today's housing crisis start to be planted. Most of these homes are built in the 1950s, so just when the automobile was making this kind of community possible. Unfortunately, that also means they made some really bad decisions on how traffic would be handled. And it's here where 450 transitions into what's become recently known as a strode. It has the constant driveways and turnoffs like a residential street, but the traffic volume and speed limits of a high-speed road. This makes it both unpleasant and dangerous for pedestrians and motorists. Most of the retail, which is also built around the 50s, are disconnected buildings with their own private parking lots. The neighborhoods still retain their grid-like structure from the city, but we can see a rise in cul-de-sacs as we get closer to the 70s. The 1950s also marks the beginning of the white flight of wealthy white people from city centers out into the suburbs. However, Annapolis is a little bit special because the property on the waterfront is so valuable that actually the opposite happened in this neighborhood, where the wealthy white people stayed in the city close to the waterfront and they pushed the racial minorities out into the suburb that's on screen now. As we leave Annapolis city limits, we see the rise of the shopping mall. From the mid-1970s to the 1990s, shopping developments start to become large, single buildings in front of a large parking lot. These malls aren't too accessible to pedestrians, meaning if you don't own a car, it's really difficult to shop there. Malls like this don't get built today for two reasons. First is the internet. People order things online, so they just aren't as profitable now. Second, they use a lot of parking. It's usually over 50% of their area, and none of it is generating profit. In a world where all kinds of development are harder, that's just too wasteful. We actually have to continue west for a long time to get to this era's housing, mostly because we're passing by this park and solar farm. Housing was cheap in the 50s, but by the time the 70s were rolling around, people started looking at their houses not just as homes, but as investments. And they start inventing things to protect or raise their property value. Most of you are probably familiar with homeowners associations or HOAs. All the housing from this era and every era after this one has one. Also, compare the layout of this neighborhood with the previous ones. Until the 70s, neighborhoods were pretty connected, just like a city, but these developments are built to be isolated. The lot size is also enormous, meaning despite covering a huge area, not many total homes can be built. When we finally reach Crofton, we can get some density back. New housing developments are going to be rarer from now on, but I want to point out how you can tell exactly where the zoning lines for this development are. Passing by Bowie, we can see some more 60s suburbs before coming to this 2007 development. Now, if you've picked up on the pattern of housing throughout the area, or you know about the 2008 financial crisis, you probably know where this is heading. This neighborhood has all of the problems of the past. It's filled with cul-de-sacs, it's car dependent, it's isolated, the HOA clearly thinks that everyone needs an identical lawn, and there's not that many homes for the amount of space that it takes up. All of the houses here are also mixed mansions, which are cheaply built but very large homes. and this was common at this time to try and raise the income level of the people living in the region. McMansions are kind of ugly, and they're a symptom of the conditions that led to the 2008 crash, but they're not what's causing the problem today. And then the trail goes cold. 450 continues on, but there aren't any new developments on it. This is partially a symptom of the 2008 housing crisis. It wasn't profitable to build homes anymore, but we have still continued building after that, so let's go off of 450 and I'll cover that. If you think the economy is bad today, the years following 2008 were even worse. Millennials had no money, and the housing of the time reflected that. We went all the way from McMansions back to the dense and interconnected townhouse neighborhoods of early Maryland. Millennials just couldn't afford anything more expensive. There was a brief moment in the late 2010s where builders were making detached homes that were deep, and some of those are still being built today, but given recent jump in housing prices and the high interest rates, I'm willing to bet that we see a return to townhomes in the future. And that is the overview of history of housing in Maryland. So what's causing the problem? It might just be that we never built housing at the same rate after the 2008 crash, but if you look at the trends, this was kind of inevitable. Over decades, housing has morphed into an investment. People have been relying on housing becoming more unobtainable. They've been planning their entire futures and retirement off of it, and now we are reaping what they sowed. I think one day I will do a part 2 about where we go from here, but for now I will end it. Thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I hope you had a great 2025.